Wrecker, my brother.
Hey Nick, how you doing? You shaved. You look
I'm doing
weird.
well. Yeah, I'm beardless. Uh, my mom says I look 20 years younger when I shave my beard versus when I have this gray beard and I look like Santa Claus.
Well, to be honest, like you do, but you do not. I think it's a much better look to show your age. And you look good for a 50-year-old. You look horrible for a 30-year-old.
Thank you, my friend. I'll tell you what, you asked how I am, and I'm actually a little bit upset because your microphone. You sound like crap, and you don't take this seriously that we are professional podcasters, right?
Well,
So
I actually am taking it seriously, but as you know, I'm actually at your old stomping ground. I'm here at the University of Georgia, which is wonderful, by the way. It's a beautiful environment, very empowering, collaborative. It's a good environment to do good science, anyway. And but I didn't pack a microphone, no, so that's on me.
yeah, it's a phenomenal group. All right, so here's the deal. What's the biggest thing that's happening in our field and every field in the world? What would you say that is, Wrecker?
Generative AI.
And you came across this paper, you sent it to me the other, so we had to discuss with one of the authors this cool paper where they did some experimental stuff with LLMs, right? And we invited our good friend Hila Lifshitz-Assaf, right, to join us and maybe discuss this paper and a whole bunch of other things.
With pleasure, with pleasure. I love how you said this. What's the biggest thing that happened? I have to say, I have like before and after, like, like GPT, right? My life before it, waiting for years. I've been like studying AI and innovation, like for 6 or 7 years before it happened, and like talking to all kind of computer scientists and will it happen and what's happening and the visual, not only GPT, right? Also like DALI and Midjourney. And it was kind of this slow hopeful progress and then boom, like right, like it's kind of
Exactly.
before and after. And then since then, I think for the first few months, if we were chit-chatting, I'll just share, I couldn't sleep. I was so hyped with adrenaline on the fact
Really?
I was just like working nonstop, reading everything, trying to swallow like the whole thing and like every piece of like information, which companies do this, like every day playing with all the like different engines out of excitement. Yeah, I think it took me 3 months to be able to sleep more than like 4 hours a night.
Are
Well,
you
that's
serious?
crazy. Wow.
It was just so exciting finally to see, you teach for years about kind of technological revolutions, and I've been studying for years innovation, and all of a sudden, I think it's an historical moment to be like, not to be over dramatic, but I do think it's history in the making, right? There is a before and after, and for professors, students, like everyone, like my kids, like everyone, this day is something to remember. I remember getting my first computer, like when I was
Mhm.
12,
Yeah. Yeah, me
right? I
too.
remember the
13.
first games exactly. So I think it's that moment in time that you're like, the first time you play with GPT, the first time you play with like Claude, all of that. So I am definitely, now I'm sleeping and I'm working. So it's
Good.
good. It's like already, there is an anniversary, right, for all of this. But I'm still, I would say, hyped more than usual. It's hard for me, for instance, to work on reviewing my old work. Like I got to review all these papers, obviously. I'm an
Yeah,
editor. I got to read papers. And there is so much new, like there's so much going on that is new, that it's
yeah.
it's attracting in a way that it's hard to almost focus on whatever was before. So I think it's a whole new world with a lot of new research questions, a lot of new potential research projects that I would love to talk about and to excite other people, because I think there are tons of opportunities to study. And this is the time for us, with everything that we know for years, to test our theories, to develop new theories, and to really see kind of how can we help push the field? Because if we just let the industry push it, that's not gonna.
I agree. Like Hila, I mean, like this before and after, like to me, plays out a little bit differently. I didn't lose any sleep over it. But we had you on in 2021 because we had this managing AI special issue, right? And you wrote one of these beautiful papers on this, and we wrote our managing AI frontier editorial. And now 2 years later, I look back at this, and this editorial, this body of work that we've done, and it feels like from a completely different age. I was like, Jesus, right? So it's kind of important. It sets the stage, of course, and everything new builds on the old, but it does feel old. And I found myself wondering whether these ideas about managing AI from there even translate to the age of generative AI.
That's really interesting to talk about predictive versus generative. And what I feel actually thank goodness that I've done this work on predictive AI. It fully prepared me to understand what's happening now with generative AI much better. And the contrast is fascinating. So not many people are able to see both. So we can also talk about that. I think that ability, and to ask what have we learned from predictive AI that is actually really relevant and the same. And it's just a hype now that they talk to, versus, these are two different beasts and they work differently. So I think it depends on the level of analysis, but the paper, for instance, that we talk about, I think is super relevant still, the ground truth of AI. This is how AI is built, and I'm seeing the same problems like with generative AI. But if you talk about the specific, the other piece that, Sarah Leibovich, Natalia Levina, and I wrote about how doctors use predictive AI for cancer diagnosis, that is, of course, different if you would use a generative AI on top of or instead of this predictive AI, but still, both of them are black box, for instance. It just doesn't look like it, right? So both generative AI and predictive AI are opaque, are designed in a way that is hard for professionals to use. It's hard to use it, and it's risky to use it for critical decisions. So I think that comparison could actually be fascinating to discuss.
And I think it's one of those things too, where, we've had studies on AI, and I kind of disagree with Recker on this. I think a lot of what we wrote about, what you wrote about with ground truth, as you said, still matters. So to act as if it's outdated, I think is a little bit too chasing the shiny object, right? That, everything's different. Because the fact is we've had generative tools. In the 1990s, I used to work with this finite element analysis tool called RASNA. And what it would do is generate parts to try and fit parameters, right? So that's the 1990s. It would generate parts to fit certain analytic parameters.
Some things are the same. It's maybe the way they interact, the way it looks, but the way it's built, the way it's designed. Some of it is not fully all new. And that's the question that I think we should ask as a field, right? Like, what is new? What is different? What is not? And try to focus on those differences and on what is new, because we don't want to reproduce the wheel. Like, we know a lot. We want to bring our knowledge from what we know.
So, before we get there, I think this is a fascinating question to explore. And I think this is really like a key issue to explore. What is different, and so forth. How could we think about it? But just one more thing. I mean, I want to have one elephant in the room that I have to address here. But just one note, as when I was sending this paper to Nick, I was saying, like, look at this paper. This is, in my view, one of the first substantive, good, robust studies on the effect of generative AI on worker practices. This paper called Navigating the Jagged Technological Frontier. And there's a couple of aspects that I find really interesting. The author team is amazing. I want to pick your brain a little bit of how it is with working with Kate and Fabrizio and Karim and, Ethan. That's got to be amazing.
A nice, diverse, interesting group. Yeah,
really cool group. But, as I was downloading it, SSRN or wherever it was, they had the download statistics. They were mind-boggling. This is a preprint. It's not reviewed. It's just a working paper. It's been downloaded hundreds of thousands of times. This is, another one of these before and after things, I think, that you talked about. Like, this is a time for, this type of IS scholarship to shine. Look at the appetite. Look at the demand for such work at a very early stage. I can't remember the right number, but it was hundreds of thousands of times this paper got downloaded. This is like all of my papers combined over 20 years. It's crazy.
This is crazy. And I have to say, this is part of working with this cross-disciplinary team, that at some point we were looking at the literature to write, for the paper. And I was realizing that all of it is preprint. Like, I didn't have much to cite on generative AI that is published, right? And my colleagues like Fabrizio and Karim are economists. And for them, it's completely okay. It's like NBER, working papers. They do it for years. But for me, it was like, wait a minute, like, I'm going to cite and like write, and everything is going to be like all preprint. It's not peer reviewed. It's not published in any like a highly esteemed journal. And it changed my mindset. So I always use SSRN, but it's almost like for like an abstract or something, just to like show it out there. But I started realizing that there is a whole knowledge market almost, or a knowledge platform that we, as I would say, IS, organizational theory, strategy, however we call us, let's say not that we are not using. And that's where the conversation is happening, because the conversation is moving too fast to wait for the journals to be the one. So you guys did an amazing job with the MISQ, like pushing it fast and so early. And it was, I think, in 2 years or something like crazy.
1 year. We did
break.
November. November
That's a
of
record.
a year and a couple months later, we had accepted all the papers. Right?
Yeah.
Amazing. So that's unheard of, right? Like if you think about all the special
It
issues
shouldn't
that
be
are
unheard of.
done.
Isn't that criminal that that's unheard of? It's because
I
everybody
agree.
sits around, doesn't get their reviews done. Editors will
Oh,
sit
yeah.
on papers for 2 months, a year.
So imagine us thinking about it. Exactly. So generative AI, like all the papers that will see the light of the day, let's say it takes you at least half a year to do the research and to write it, right? And then like in 4 years, we will only see them and we'll be able to cite them.
Yeah.
That's insane, right?
Like Andrew said this, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but he said that at a board meeting when he was chief of MIS Quarterly. He said, you won't see a ChatGPT paper in MIS Quarterly because these things are being submitted and it'll take us some years to get some. And I was like, that's exactly the wrong attitude. Why do we not see them out now? Because people are already submitting. People are already like, I've received a lot of these papers already. So this work has been done. The papers are being out there, but you're right. We haven't seen a single robust, good study out there yet. Right. This is wrong. This is wrong.
But all our colleagues are submitting. So like the economists, like legal scholars, like, scientists, computer scientists. And these are the people that I read for this, right? Because we don't have anything yet. Like I can talk to you guys and talk to my colleagues of what they're doing, but there's nothing written for me to read and learn about it. So I've been exposing myself in that sense to the broader, I would say, academic literature, because the conversation is moving faster there. So this is a shout out, let's say, that we have to, as a field, really do more of what you guys have done with those special issues and push it on the times, and also think about other ways like to use this, I would say, secondary preprint knowledge platforms and markets on each other. Like the fact that you shared it, and that's wonderful, but many times I don't even know about it and it's considered bragging, right? If I would have sent you that, it would be like, why am I sending you that? But how would you know that I'm doing it?
Exactly.
So the whole norm of how we're doing it should be different, I would say, because we want to spread the conversation and we want to start. So we don't need to wait for academy for a full year. So, the podcast that you're doing, all these other ways to share early knowledge is really important when we're talking about this type of work.
And I think one more implication before we get back to your paper, but maybe one more thought. I mean, what this obviously does with these preprint services, RN, NBER, Archive, and so forth, it puts the burden on the reader. It hasn't been quality assured yet. You have to make up your own mind about the method, about the ideas, about everything. And in a way, given that we have like thousands of journals, including predatory journals, and a lot of good, but also bad and poor research, I think that's a good thing because I have to make up my own mind. I can't take any signals for granted. And I have to read the paper and I have to think about whether or not this is good. And I don't think this is a bad thing.
And again, you're an elitist like usual, because here's the problem. You mentioned that this one was downloaded. I just looked like 60-some thousand times, right? Already, and it's a preprint. But look at who's on it.
Of course.
Right?
That's what I wanted to say.
Fabrizio, Hila, Kate Kellogg, right? The Kareem. Yeah. These are celebrity academics at incredibly prestigious institutions. So that's what happens when you have a preprint culture. Your celebrity academics, because that's the only signal. Whereas like MISQ, you could be a nobody. You get it published in MISQ, people look at or OrgSci or any of these.
Advantage. So Michael Bicard, actually, we had a discussion on it, a debate discussion in the Open Science Conference was it in Vienna last year? I think it was in Vienna last year when it was hosted. And Suzanne Beck and Marion Poez led the whole thing, and they said, is open science like good for scientific progress? And Michael Bicard from INSEAD had this great point about the preprint market. And what he said is what happens at the end of the day, if you open all of this, people choose according to brands, the brand of the institution or the brand of this. And you have less of this
Harvard
meritocracy.
And MIT people.
Exactly. And you have less of this meritocracy that the academic journals adhere to. So I fully agree. It's a tension. I want as an editor to find those gemstones that are not right, that like, it's like, it does not have to do. I don't even read. I don't know who the author is. I don't look at who the author is. I don't want to know from which institution they are. That's the beauty of having this like blind, review process. On the other hand, these preprints, right, are powerful. So we don't have a good solution, but I fully agree with both of you in that sense, the big advantages and the big disadvantages.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. Maybe the solution is to have something like a blinded preprint platform or whatever. Okay, can I get one elephant out of the room? Hila.
Yeah.
Seriously, how dare you guys? So you're writing this Gen AI paper 3 years after our special issue, and you call it Navigating the Jagged Frontier. Hello, frontiers of AI. My ears were ringing. And who do you not cite? How dare you not cite the Managing AI paper that talks about the frontiers of AI in a paper that you call the Frontiers of AI? What the hell is going on here?
Ay, ay, ay. Luckily, we can still do it. So first of all, I'm taking notes, Luckily, we can still do it because the paper is not, submitted. It was submitted. It got, quick responses, and we are rethinking. So let me tell you the problem with such a paper. That's what we said. We don't want to, the way we thought about it, we have a cross-disciplinary team, right? With junior people that their career matters, right? Like Fabrizio Dell'Acqua, he's a postdoc, he's been leading the whole project. We have Edward McFarlane, who's like, he's not that junior, but he's, different than, let's say, Kareem, Kate, and myself, and Ethan. So we want to think about publishing in a place that gets impact and is rigor. On the other hand, the pace of it, right? We don't want to wait for like the full. So what we did was we were like chunking basically the project to few papers. So this is the first paper that you are seeing, and the literature we cited there, if you would see, it's Nature and Science, PNAS kind of literature. It's not the management literature, because that's what we're targeting just for speed and impact, like across the field, because that's where the conversation, as I said, is happening right now on the performance part. So this paper is basically the performance frontier of AI. It's not the deeper stuff, and we have a lot of deeper stuff in our study. So how about I zoom out for a second for those, not assume in a bragging way that everyone read or downloaded the book, and I just talk about it for a few minutes, and then I can tell you how we're doing. And I would love to hear from you, by the way, based on your work, which of because we have a lot of data, and we now are working on the management papers, basically. We just now started because this took us a while, but we're now working on the deeper, let's say, more management, org theory, IS type of papers. So I'll just take a pause and talk about the paper high level for a second.
Yeah, and the project and how it came about. You got a bunch of BCG people with you, and it's like, what happened? How did this come about? Can you give us the backstory?
Of course. So the backstory that we have a lot of what you don't know about these names of people that we are all consultants in our past, apparently. Kareem worked at BCG. Kate, I can't remember if it was BCG or no, she worked is it Deloitte, I think? I used to work in strategy consulting with the equivalent of Booz Allen, the collaborator of Booz Allen Hamilton. So consulting is an industry that is unique, I would say. Many of us came from it. A lot of qualitative people, over the years I've learned, come from consulting. And it has that dilemma right now because it's a knowledge-intensive profession. You have smart young people as professionals going into it, but it's text-based. So it's exactly like the law industry and other industries that are really disrupted by generative AI, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Kareem had this relationship with the partner, Francois Candelon, that you can see his name on the paper as well. He is leading their internal research unit. So the nice thing with these big companies, as you know, they have their own research institute inside. So Francois is the head of this research institute. And basically, they've been having conversations. And as we said, the before and after. And once AI hit, the conversation started going like, what should BCG and the consulting industry do about this? Like, should we adopt it? Should we not? And that's how it came about. I have to say, this has been amazing to work with an internal research unit of a company. I've never had that. I literally 2 hours ago finished like a meeting with like Francois and 3 of his people from that. It's called the Henderson Institute of BCG to discuss together, to think together about the managerial implications of some of our findings. And they are so deep in the data. So it's really unique to even have academics and kind of, I don't know how to call them. It's like researchers that work in a consulting, but they do it only for a few years, right? So it's a rotation-based role. So all of them are consultants that are going to be back in consulting in 2 more years. And for 2-3 years, they do this research part. So that has been the first interesting and unique part, I would say, of this collaboration. And we collect data, we're analyzing data together, and of course, everything de-identified, and it took us a while to figure out how to work with this internal research unit of a company. The second thing was just to work within the team. So because what we decided to do was to do a field experiment plus a qualitative kind of study of interviewing everyone that participates. So the field experiment was designed by Fabrizio and Karim Lakhani, and the manipulation that we did there was training on generative AI, and the training was supplemented by the GPT guru of prompt engineering.
By Ethan.
Exactly. Yeah. So you can imagine he was giving a kind of a 7-minute video training of this is the basic of prompt engineering. So what we thought was like, let's take a management problem, like the typical management problem of strategy. This is what we teach in business school. This is what strategy consultants do. You know, you need to have a CEO recommend and decide. You need to recommend and make a CEO decide whether to invest in a specific brand or not, right? So very classic, I would say. And on the other hand, let's have a more creative, innovative kind of new product development task. So that's what we did on these 2 different tasks. You have overall 758, which that's the phenomenal thing of working with these big, humongous organizations, that they got so many young professionals, talented, highly educated professionals to participate. Half of them on the more kind of strategy, management, analytical decision that was based on financial data, on qualitative interviews, and the other half on let's invent kind of new products for this company. So that was overall kind of what we did. And that's why you can also see some of the team members are more like field experimentalist, kind of econ trained. And then you have me and Kate Kellogg that are kind of more qualitative. I now do both field experiments and field studies. The moment we got to understand that we want to interview, and actually Kareem is the one who pushed for interviews. So I would say we are all smooshed kind of in our thinking by now. Like that's Kareem cool. Is like, you should go all ethnography on this one. Like, you shouldn't care about the performance. And I kind of go in the analysis and I'm telling him like, but I want to fully understand this. Like, how did we measure this? Did we do a good cluster analysis? I'm not trusting the text analysis here. So we are smooshed method-wise, but it took us a while, like, you know, of a year to work together to get to that sense that everyone kind of cares about everything. And we see this as one, because we realize that it's not just about how people use AI and whether they were right or wrong. It's also what do they feel afterwards, or what do they think? Should they use it? Like, so that's the qualitative and kind of quantitative part working together.
Well, it seems like I have 2 good thoughts. I mean, one of them is so in the work that I do with companies, I think a lot of them, they are not quite doing this. They're not approaching it as a internal research task, and I think they should, right? They all think about like in which of our tasks, in our knowledge structure task, can we use it, and what will be the impact on performance and quality and time and stuff like that, right? Very few of them, of course, go to such a length and do such a rigorous study of that, right? Even though the ambition, I guess, is very, very prevalent in many of the organizations. The second point I wanted to make is it is surprising how consistent these results are with, I guess, similar studies. You know, some people have done this sort of task impact study without ChatGPT and see like quality, etc. You know, the split half effect, like the lower quality workers seem to be impacted better, etc. Isn't it amazing? I find it amazing from a high level perspective to see how very quickly a fairly robust body of evidence is emerging about the impact of this technology. Usually you don't see this, right? Usually you see here is a bit up and here's a bit down, but here it seems to be quite consistent, no?
Nick, it looks like you want to say something as well. Maybe I'll
Well, I was going to let you, but so the thing that gets me is this is my problem with chasing shiny new objects.
Yes.
You're always acting as if, like, even if I look at this paper, right, it's LLMs, ChatGPT, do they improve workers, right? And the fact is, we look at knowledge worker productivity for decades and decades, right? And even the split that you're talking about, Recker, I don't know, but I suspect that there's a split in the literature among experts. And like, if I were to hypothesize, and I know you registered these hypotheses, which is kind of cool.
Which is very cool.
But, you know, it's one of those things where we know so what would I say, ChatGPT, if you're an expert, it's going to be a little less useful, right? Because it's kind of beginner knowledge. is what it gives you. It gives you a starting point. When you have to write, like I told you in a previous podcast record, the first time I used it, I had to write a visa letter for, and it's like, what do I put in a visa letter? I put that, and then boom, it knocked out a visa letter for me. And it's like, yeah, I'm not going to have it write something I know deeply better than anyone else, right? If I'm an expert in something, when we play around in class with having it write queries and code, it doesn't write elegantly yet, right? So it's like an expert, it's less useful for an expert than it is for a novice, for someone who doesn't know anything. It's incredible. So these stand to reason for me. And my issue is that, yes, it's ChatGPT, so let's hurry up, run, and we'll get published, and everyone will get published, and it's all good. But no one is reading the 23rd, and this is always my issue. And to me, scholarship, and this is why, and I'm just listening. You got me on this Freakonomics podcast, right? And now I'm listening. They're talking about Feynman, and Feynman likes to say that, and they're on like the third Feynman podcast, and he's of course the Nobel Prize winning physicist, huge celebrity. So he said that, one thing he didn't like is people who claim to know something that they don't really know that well. And it's far better to have doubt and not necessarily claim, and be a little more humble. But we're in this publish or perish game where everybody has to act like what I'm doing is new. I'm doing is new. Whereas if they were a little more sober, they would just go back and really explore what, on an abstract level, am I dealing with here? And what is ChatGPT? And then abstract it, get it, and then, but I think instead everyone just acts like it's brand new, and they're all getting publications.
I think this is a little bit like, I know where you're coming from. Sorry if I jump in here, but I think this is in the context of this particular body of work. I think that's not quite correct, and it's not quite fair either. Because I think what you guys have done, and which is, I think, the right thing to do, is here's this new technology. Let's build a body of evidence. Let's build a good body of evidence and methodology. This is not a theoretical question to me. This is, first of all, this is an empirical question. Like, what does it do? How much? How little? Where? For whom? Etc. and so forth. I think we need to do that, and we can't do this if we first have to think for like 5 years about what's different here on a conceptual level, right? So that's the first thing I would say. Second, this is not a paper that screams this is new, etc. This is just a paper that very thoroughly, I think, looks at, okay, here's a technology that is relevant to knowledge worker. We know next to nothing about it. Well, first of all, it's new. Let's have a good, clean look at it in a very, rigorous way. Field experiments, the gold standard of these things. So just for that alone, I think this is exactly what people should be doing, and this is exactly also what we should be publishing, because this is this type of knowledge that we need. Now, do we need to abstract and think about what's different and how does it relate to the cumulative tradition? Sure. Not every one single paper has to do all of these things. So this paper doesn't do that. But this paper gives us something else, and now we can use that and ask the question that you're right. We haven't figured out yet what's different, how does it relate, and so forth. So this is still an open question, but I think we should be careful in saying everyone has to.
So I understand exactly what you're saying, and we've had this discussion before, and I agree. For a particular paper, I'm open to empirical trend. The thing that I'm bummed out about, and not this particular paper, but in general, is I see it in the organizational publications like Organization Science, Academy of Management Review, Academy of Management Journal, SMJ, Strategic Management, right? Is that they're acting as if no one has researched this stuff before. Yeah. And they're generating ideas that are kind of, recreating, and I could name a couple papers, I'm not going to, where they're recreating conversations from 1988. Right, in the information systems field. Now, we've talked about this. I don't think they should have to go look out. It's IS researchers' job to publish these things in management journals to let people know there's a cumulative tradition, because you can't expect.
Let's talk about this. I would love to hear actually from you. So I fully agree, and that's what I said to begin with. Like what is new and what is not. We shouldn't just focus on, like, there's a lot that we know, and our role is to bring our knowledge to this new technology and to the world out there, and to shush a little bit some of this hype and to add to the new parts, to say, okay, that's where we need to focus, because now it's all over the place, right? Yeah. So I agree. And this paper that we talked about is just the beginning. As I said, this is the performance part, and it's important to know the performance, but this is just the beginning. Like I think the important questions we haven't written about yet, in the sense of the important questions of theoretically, like what is different here, right?
Yeah. You do make a little attempt at that, right? There's in the beginning of the paper, before you get to the experiment, you theorize a little bit about three differences, right? So there's an unexpected novelty thing. Then
Difference
there's
between, yes.
yeah, the opacity thing, which I guess isn't all that, it's kind of known. But then the other one is this, which I found most interesting, is this idea of, well, you have a different ratio of performance gains to investment costs. I thought that was an interesting one.
It's very
right?
clever.
This is this general nature of this technology, that it not only, it's
I do
performance
think it's
gain.
worth doing it. That's why I do think we have to, like, it's performance, but the performance really change everything. So you know how many arguments I had with Kareem initially? I told him, it's an efficiency part. I don't care about that part. I care about how it's changing the nature of work, how professionals, their identity, their thinking. He said, Hila, if it's like a big change in efficiency, this is a revolution, or this is just incremental. And like once we saw the results, we completely flipped, as I said, our roles. I was like, really? 40% of a boost of an improvement? My goodness, that changes everything. I have to ask them about what does it mean? Like, should they even do this type of work, right? It's like almost half of your job is better. And then Kareem said, oh, but you should make sure you ask about identity, because like that means like they should maybe like rethink who they are and like what they do. And so I think the numbers in that sense, the performance does matter. It is a different beast. It works differently. It could challenge organizations and knowledge work in a new way that will challenge then our bigger kind of theories of organizations, of work, of professionals, of knowledge work. Like this is, it creates knowledge in a different way than we humans create knowledge, but people are using it. It's so easy to use, which that was not the case years ago. That is not the case with predictive AI. You have way more control and agency as a humans of what you take from it versus not. Here, you kind of get merged into it almost, like you're co-writing with it. You start working with it. It's hard to put the boundaries. Like we are analyzing the data, we constantly are checking, like, wait a minute, did this idea came from the user or that came from AI? With some users, it's very easy to see. With many, it's not, because it's this co-writing process that this is new. So I think that's exactly kind of what is new, what is not. Like getting an input, if you just like copy paste whatever you found, that you could also do with predictive AI and like, that doesn't
Google
make
search.
Yeah, let me play that back a little. I mean, let me play that back a little bit. Like what I think you're saying is what we're seeing here, and you said this in the beginning with the before and after. This is the fastest diffused technology in the human history. That means something. The efficiency means something. I agree on that one, because it does challenge identity and practices and professions and all that sort of things, right? But maybe what's different here is not so much the fact that it's a LLM and a generative, maybe not the hallucination bit, but maybe it's this general purpose interface. The fact that not only specialists, but literally my grandmother can use this thing, right? Exactly. Because it has this general purpose and natural interface. We've had natural interfaces beforehand, right? My 2-year-old, he can work with an iPad. And we've had general purpose technology also before, but like Google search, you have to be able to write, this thing, and probably the next generation where we don't even need to prompt anymore, then this is literally general purpose interfacing. And maybe that's the difference. Not so much what it does beyond it, but the fact that it's so available.
The general purpose of it, the interaction that is so smooth and so similar to other humans, that I think is a leap from other technologies. It doesn't feel like a tool. It feels like you're talking to a friend. It feels like you're talking to a human. You're not even sure these days if you're talking to a bot or to a human, right? You don't know with your students. Some people tell me, oh, I know to identify. Maybe you know to identify the students that didn't modify it at all, but it's hard to identify if it was written by, GPT or a student. You can make it right, like a Harvard versus Notre Dame versus like Warwick student, right? So it can have all of these traits that we did not have before, and that does change the way they work with knowledge.
I give you another one, which I talked to students here at UGA yesterday, and I said something like, look, I think what we'll see is that AI will just become a very commonplace automated piece of our digital infrastructure. And I likened it to 5G networks. It's just there. We'll just assume it's there. And I think, and this is amazing, but because we've had technology, like 5G network technology, we've had that, and it blends into our infrastructure to the point that now no one even spends 5 minutes thinking about it.
Like electricity, kind of. Right? Some people say maybe it will be like electricity. I think it's
exactly
different. I don't think it's an infrastructure technology, and I think it is risky. But before I tell you what I think, I would actually love to hear from you two, because you both kind of had interesting opinions and contrasting ones on what is different. Now you've seen the performance and how this really matters, both in the creative task and how it could also be risky for the analytics task, because people can really get wrong. And the counterintuitive thing, Jan, because you said some of these we already knew, I would say what was counterintuitive with our findings, the training actually made people more, like they made them worse, like because they were overconfident and they were more wrong. So I would say that for me was like, oh my goodness, I didn't expect that. That's a risky part. So I would say for me, I had a new caution kind of out of this study. I was like, on one hand, wow, it's the performance boost and this 40% improvement. On the other hand, and much, much faster, of course, 25% faster and all that. On the other hand, oh my, like this is dangerous. People make mistakes, and they, even when you try to teach them, they think they know it so well, so fast, because it's so elusive and seems easy to work with. They make even more mistakes. And these are serious consultants. And I talked to them and they told me, I double checked. How come? Like, in the end, I also confronted them, some of them. And towards the end, when we analyzed the data, I said, many people got this wrong. What do you think about yourself? So people were really trying hard. These are consultants. These are not like a lab student that gets paid $20 and doesn't care about the results. They cared about it, and they were still wrong. So I would say, for me, this was surprising. And then I have now we're delving into the interviews, right? So we interviewed almost 500. This is like a mega interview project by itself. Fascinating from a method perspective. We had to kind of reimagine the how to do interviews, from me being used to doing it, maybe with like a couple of co-authors, all of a sudden leading a team of 7 people interviewing. And we also did some recorded interviews, which I have to say, from a method perspective, that's really interesting to do for the control condition, because we wanted to have live human interviews of those that got AI. But for the control, we said, okay, we cannot interview all of them. So, and I have all this data and I interviewed them on a ton of things. So I'm curious, if I had to ask you, what do you find interesting to look into, to analyze, to ask about these professionals that are using this technology and are experiencing kind of its velocity, its impact, anything that you think is new? Because I don't want to repeat old questions and write about things that we feel we know.
Well, my answer there is you can't help but repeat old questions, because you're dealing with humans and humans with the technology. So anything you're seeing is going to involve humans with the technology, and you will cover. So I have two bits of advice. One is the things knowledge, right? Innovation. So if you go back and look at the stuff on knowledge and innovation, you'll find that the exact same thing applies. So that's my first part. My second kind of comment is, but we know it's different. Like you said, the speed ups are maybe, Stalin said quantity has a quality all its own, right? And at one point, when you get an acceleration that's dramatically, then it's qualitatively different. So I think it's our job as scholars to not be consultants in the sense, well, we can be consultants on the side, but not in our scholarship, right? And right now, consultants are running around acting as if they know something and saying it's all brand new and we have to read, right? And that's the pull for us. And that gets published, because right now all the people who, but to me, just as a kind of a purist, I'm like, you know what? Our job as scholars is to understand things deeply. Other words, we're just consultants, right? A consultant, I just saw a Gartner AI ethics report, and they surveyed a bunch of people, and this is what people say motivates them to do AI ethics, right? They know nothing about, clearly just something as simple as social desirability bias, right? They're not controlling for that in their survey instrument. They're basically getting what people think they want to hear, and then they're putting it out there, right? And we, as researchers, we don't want to go that way. And the problem is the world is pulling us that way. We have to publish quicker, rather than Nature, you mentioned. They're not worried about the history of knowledge and technology, right? They want to know what's a cool finding, and they'll publish it now. Management research doesn't want to necessarily, they want to publish a ChatGPT paper. And I think we as scholars have a choice. Do we be pulled in that direction, which I think we all are, Or do we step back and think, okay, what is the timeless issue here? What's the best of our knowledge on the timeless issue? And then let's move it. So that's where I lean, always knowing, like Recker said, that, scholarship is a bunch of different papers, and some are empirical, some are conceptual, and in the end, hopefully move things forward. But I think, to me, the key is the posture as a researcher. When we put an empirical thing forward, we have to be humble, and we have to point out that it's when we talk to media, when we do whatever, it's one little finding that's just not even a pebble in our edifice of our knowledge, right? So let's be humble. Let's have that posture, and I'm worried that we don't, right? Instead, we have this idea that every study is somehow definitive.
Yeah. So I have two answers. One direct, concrete one to the question that you're asking, and one is a response to Nick. To the response to Nick is, I'm actually reaching the same conclusion, but to me as an individual scholar. Like, what I would want to do is to theorize about the difference and applies it into this cumulative tradition. That's what I would do, because I know that there's 1,000 people just running, like isolated studies and publishing the goddamn things. Because if I wanted to do this, and I said this before, like, then I'd be placing myself in competition of who can do it faster, better, more rigorous, etc. And that, it's very difficult for any one person to win this.
We're not going to compete with Hila and her team
exactly.
here.
I'm not going to compete with this author team.
We're also not competing, by the way, with all the computer scientists. If we were, we would have done it in a lab.
Yeah, exactly.
This is fast to you. This is terribly slow for the economist and the computer scientist. Like, we had to invest and work with a company for
it takes a long time. Yeah, exactly.
All of the papers that I cited, none of them did that. All of them are doing it in a lab, and they are publishing in Nature and Science way faster than us, right? So
and that's why I say, like, this is a great and a noteworthy study. We should talk about it because because of that. This is the first really robust, great study on this. I fully agree with it. So, but let me get back to your question, Hila, because when you asked that question, I was thinking about, well, in this, you basically have here's a task setting as an experiment. This group gets it, this one does. It's very task isolated, right? I would interview them about the process. What did you do before and after? Because what are this hallucination and the retainment problem that you talked about? I think this is the question, like, on the process level, organizational implication is we need to check for that. We need checks and balances. Maybe we place them before we do this, maybe we place them afterwards, but somewhere in that process. So in my interviewing, I would literally step outside of that task and go before the task and after the task and say, like, well, what did you do beforehand for, how did you do your verification? How do you know that beforehand or afterwards? Maybe they do something before they start the interacting, maybe they do something later, right? So really take it out of this, a person interacts with a computer in a task, this is a classic HCI setting in which this is, and take it to this process level where everything, we don't do stuff, we always do stuff in a sequence of actions and events. So what happened before and what happened after? That's what I would ask, because then, this is where, if I learn, I don't believe this, then I would be doing something in response, right? I would engage on a different path, so to speak. So I would take that road, I think, in the interviews, because that's something. Tell me what you did next. Tell me what you did before. And then what happened? And then what happened? And then what happened, right?
Especially for those mistakes. So if yes, and that's, by the way, to close a loop from where also we started and what we're talking now, right? We talked about that predictive AI and what we know. And what I've learned with the study with Sarah Leibovich and Natalia Levina on doctors using predictive AI for critical decisions is that those that wanted to adopt it had to really try to interrogate it. That's how we call it, right? And try to understand it because it's so black box. And we've actually seen also with generative AI, but very differently, that there is, and that's why it's interesting to see, is it similar or not? In order to know, exactly as you said, Jan, is it right or wrong, right? You have to validate or try to understand it in the process. You cannot just go into it. So some people were having spreadsheets on the side and doing it, for instance, in the same time and checking it. Some people were checking, asking GPT to check itself. And now we're going into this whole body of work because interrogation practices of technologies in that sense we know a little bit, but it's not that we have like years of understanding of how people do it, and how should they do it, and what is, right or wrong. So this is fascinating. This has been fascinating. We're now in the analysis process.
So we do have that. So 2019, I wrote a paper with a bunch of colleagues where we looked at video game development. We looked at Intel using generative tools to develop the processor. And it was in communications, the ACM, right? So it wasn't an organizational.
Yes.
But what we did is we argued about how they have to create a mental model for the generative tool. Now, these were rule-based generative tools, but that idea of, scrutinizing or investigating the model and creating some understanding of what's going on in the model, right? That's a key part to knowledge generation, I think. And there are some older papers going back in OrgSci, for example, and in some others that try and kind of get at that, where people
That's what we want to see. As you said, the theories, we want to build on everything we know on how to interrogate technologies and work with it and validate and make sure, and to see is this different or not now, because of the difference in the nature of communication, which is different, because the doctors I studied with the predictive AI, they couldn't talk to the thing, right? They could only see, this looks like cancer. It would not reply to them. Now, that's a temptation, and that's also the risk that you ask it. And we actually see consultants that asked GPT to validate itself. They got convinced by it even when it was wrong, right? So because it has this persuasive nature and this communicative nature. So that's what I hope to be able to tease that apart. Like, what do we know? What is already clear that they will do? But because of the nature of this technology, what is different? Do we see anything different? Do we see? Wow. So that's the delicate kind of new, I would say, kind of tension to try to understand.
So Hila, and I'm sure you will, because looking at your research, you're always get at things incredibly deeply. And
absolutely.
But so I have a question for you. As a lot of young people, especially information systems, but we get a pretty diverse group listening to this podcast. But I know my first time I submitted to OrgSci back a decade or so ago, I didn't know. Now I had Anne Myshock as my senior editor, so she knew how to deal with us IS researchers attempting to publish out in OrgSci, and she was very kind of constructive in her feedback and everything. What would be the advice, right? Because OrgSci, and you're an editor at OrgSci, if I'm, and I'm publishing an information systems and I want to try to publish in OrgSci or something, what should I keep in mind?
So people ask me many times, like, is there a difference when you choose to submit to MISQ or OrgSci? Or like, because I love publishing both in IS journals, and I highly respect IS journals and management journals. And I remember myself the first time when I started thinking about, ISR and others. I think the big difference that I find is that IS journals know a lot about technology, and OrgSci and Management Sci, or all the like AMJ, all the rest, sometimes I would say under kind of theorize the technology. So it's kind of like, it exists. It's almost in the methods, or it's like a context. It's in the background, but they don't. So for instance, you can think about it as an advantage and a disadvantage, right? Like as an author or someone, if you're someone that really, cares about it. So I would say you have to make sure that you really theorize it. If you come to an editor like me and others that come from, also IS, you have to make sure you cannot treat technology as this, like really something in the background. I have a paper this week. I was looking into a paper that said, and there is this new thing. These communities, they create an object, an artifact, a knowledge artifact, and it's new. We don't know anything about it. I was like, seriously?
Hello?
I was like, pulling my hairs, right? Like, so you have like, and I'm sure this person was genuine. They never read the literature, which is both organizational and IS, on online communities producing knowledge artifacts. It's sad, because it's sad. I don't want to I think it's sad, but we have this kind of disciplinary problem within the same discipline of management, right? So when you're submitting it to OrgSci, I would say, there is you have to think also about the technology. You cannot just people are not in the same stage they were 10 years ago that they thought about it.
Yeah.
The other difference is that you want to think about the organizational implication. It is organization science. Lamar and the team of editors really care about the organizational implication of that, if it is a technology you're studying. So you cannot also go all the way deep to the technology and ignore the fact that and the organization could be the online community. It doesn't have to be a company, right? Not like old school organizations. besides those two big things, I don't see a difference, to be honest. I tell friends, like when they ask me, I was like, I don't know. It's all about the specific editors. I cite the same papers. I write to the same community. I see both audiences as my audience. I think both of you also write, like what you write is in both worlds, right? Like I don't see that strong separation that some people do. I think it's all about kind of your audience and your community. And everyone that has been studying kind of IS and organizational theories, we both write to both of these journals.
So, like, I have the perception that you actually get a few IS scholarship submissions to Oxide. Is that true?
I think I have the selection bias that I'm the one getting them. So probably I don't know to answer because I'm probably the one that is getting them. So you should ask like someone above me maybe.
But do you get do you have a lot of papers to handle? Do you get like 10, 20, 50, 100?
No, but there's so many like open source, like online communities. All I get is the stuff that like, I do and I've done for years. So like, yeah.
Okay. So you don't get any IS papers, you get papers that are in your field of expertise.
No, they are IS, but they're all around, the phenomenon, like, yes, but not
so
only.
if I look at this, it's interesting because there's you and Anastasia Sargiva, right? Those are the two.
Anastasia just emailed me today about like your papers, who should we have as reviewers? Like, and she's also getting wonderful papers on online communities, on AI. Like we are the ones getting those papers, but there's Melissa Mesmenian was there for a while as well. Who else would have gotten those papers?
Well, someone like Brusoni can handle things. He's not an IS person, but he's technology focused, right?
Sonali Shah was there for a while as well. So like Lamar has a really wide, he's really enhanced, by the way. So I have to say, like, from the moment Lamar became the deputy, the head of OrgSci, like it's amazing to see how it's way more diverse, like the editors. So I really think people can find their home. And also the pace. So he's been doing a lot about the pace of publishing. So what we spoke earlier, he's really the first one to say he wants this to move fast, which means a lot for us. So like we have to like make sure reviewers submit on time. We try to only have 2 rounds and not more than that.
Yeah.
And
I love that.
Things. He's really pushing for this.
So this is what's funny. At MISQ, right? I'm an editor there. And I believe in that. I'm only going to use reviewers for 2 rounds, right? And then my job is to edit. And you can always poke holes into a paper, right? But at one point you have to converge. So I'm really attempting to do this. And then I submit a paper, and it seems like none of the editors that I submit to have
so the quality is not to not have reviewers after, but to make a decision like after 2 years and not to have. But what you're saying is very brave. I've never done that.
No, I've done the same.
To like release,
I do 2 rounds.
That's it. 2 rounds and that's it.
As far as I'm concerned,
we did the same with your paper too. If you remember, the reviewers were not involved.
Of course, that's why we talked to you.
We did multiple rounds, but only 2 with reviewers, and I think that's the way to do it because reviewers are not there to make decisions. You don't care about their buy-in. The whole idea of reviewers is to catch stuff that you might not. It's the editor's job to publish papers. So I really am trying to be disciplined. 2 rounds that I use reviewers, and that's it. And then I have to use my brain, right? And if they've addressed the major issues, because, and here, I mean, I'm an author in a paper that's somewhere that I don't know how many rounds we're in, but they keep, and there are 2 reviewers left. One keeps buying in every round. And the other one keeps saying, I still don't like it, still don't like it. And it's like the editor at this point should know that one reviewer, and I don't know whether the editor is waiting for us to turn the following but at this point it's like they're not adding anything beyond.
No, it's not your job as an author. Like that's
some people like it, some people don't like it. I have a paper now that actually goes into the 3rd round, and the editor, and I value that very highly, actually said, look, you will not turn reviewer 3 in this case. 2 reviewers kind of like it, and they have all sorts of suggestions. Reviewer 3 just doesn't like it. Didn't like it 1st round, 2nd round, and he said, like, you don't have to turn him. He literally said that. The editor is like, let's do the other things, and if you get the other 2 to an exam, like, let's not worry about reviewer 3. He literally wrote that in the letter. It's like, dude, that's good editorship. That's strong editorship. Give us a direction, because now we know what we have to do, right? Otherwise, we would have, done all sorts of things just to please that one person that just, for valid reasons, just doesn't like it. And that's okay.
Well, and
I
it's a
guess.
flawed study. I guarantee the study that you submitted is flawed, as is every single study any of us have ever done, right? The perfect study doesn't exist.
Does not exist. Does
It's
not
the editor's job to be like, is this good? Is this
good
interesting?
enough or not? Is it rigor enough or not? There is a standard for the journal.
Yeah.
I fully agree. I love to hear, like, it's so interesting to hear from your experience as editors. I've never done this, like, strong two things. I'll let you know how it goes. I'll think about
please
it.
do. Please do.
I don't go
Hila.
third round
Yeah. Well, I'm trying the same, and so
with
far it's
reviewers.
okay. What I struggle more with as an editor is that I'm trying to imprint my voice later on, and I have to tell myself, no, you wouldn't write it like leave him, right? Leave him their voice. Because I can be kind of naggy later, like, nah, rewrite that first page, rewrite this. Yeah, I don't like the abstract, blah, blah, blah. And at some stage, of course, that has to stop too. We just got to get on with it.
But I do that too. In the last
Yeah,
couple of
you
rounds,
are.
I do bug them about get rid of this paragraph in the. So in the last couple of rounds, when there are no more reviewers, that's exactly what I do.
I do that
Your
too.
abstract. Right now I just accepted a paper at MISQ, and I'm like, you're accepted. You're in. I still don't like your title. Consider this
I've done the same. Yeah.
But this is wonderful. I have to say, like, the work that both of you have done to shape my paper with, like, Sarah Leibovich and Natalia Levina has been fundamental, right, to the paper. And you can, and especially when it was under such speed, it really matters to have editors that care about it and care about the strong message and what, like, how to. So title is the world, right? Like, title is everything. Like, an editor that gives you a better title, you owe your life to that editor. It's like, this is so important, right? Like, I remember, like, some editors telling me one day, oh, but you didn't have that. And I was like, oh my goodness, sometimes you're so deep into it, you cannot zoom out and see the big picture. And a good editor helps you see that and helps you, like, have a stronger paper.
And I'm going to use this, like, maybe in closing, just as a shout out, because this happened to me now. Nick and I, we've talked about simulation work that I've been doing for over a year. Well, it's now accepted. But in the last couple of rounds, they're actually not in the official rounds, just in between, our editor, who's actually Jerry Kane, like, he flipped our title, abstract, and first page, and it's so much better. It's so much more, like, exciting and interesting and accessible. And I didn't see it. I really didn't see it. I was completely stuck in the way that we set up this paper. And he basically said, like, why don't you write it this and this way? And oh my God, this is so much better. So Jerry, thank you very much. And it'll be out next year. That's another problem, of course, because now it goes into this abyss of forthcoming papers. But anyway, it has a good first page.
Of academia, right? So we started with complaining about academia, and there are also some beautiful things. And that, I would say, precious work and caring and commitment of editors, it's amazing. I don't think many professions have that, right? That someone really cares about your work and voluntarily kind of helps you to that extent. And we people help each other over the years. It's pretty amazing.
Well, it's also, Hila, it's one of the few professions where we get written critical feedback on everything that we do. Like, I teach my students, it's like, look, you got to prepare that you will get like 12 pages of comments, and they're not going to be friendly. And like, I always like it to professional sports player that, they have a bad game and the next day they read about it in the press or something. I can't think of any other profession where everything that we do gets written feedback from our peers, and usually not in this gentle manner, right? So it's both ways. It can be caring and empowering, and it can be really harsh, and we gotta train for it as well.
It's very hard. I fully agree. It's both.
Well, Hila, I'll tell you what, it was an absolute pleasure speaking with you. You're such a wonderful leader in our field. So thanks for coming on board.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. I love this podcast. I'm a fan.
Wow.
Good. You listen. You don't listen. I don't believe. See, that's just like,
I listen.
Like Hila comes on, Paul Leonardi pretends. Everyone pretends they listen.
Isaac pretends. Yeah.
The only one who actually listens is Kalle Luutinen, right? He actually tells us what we get wrong every podcast, right?
He hasn't done this in a while, so either we got better or he stopped listening.
He stopped listening. Yeah.
Hila, it was a blast. Thank you so much. All the best, and good luck with that paper. Let us know how it continues.
Yes, I'll let you know. Thank you so much, both.